Chapter 9. The catcher's eyes flicked open. Someone had reported Adam X. A file had been opened. A person from the Register of Affairs records had either been telling lies or knew something damning about Adam X. Do we wait or simply leave it? A government voice asked. The Eluluk were represented. We shouldn't take any chances. The catcher sat impassively. Known by his generic title, he would respond only when directly addressed. For the time being, he was content to play with the beastie, the wrath, inside his jacket pocket. If we decide to go ahead, then we have to eliminate. If we decide to go ahead without full authority. Or evidence, the Eluluk butted in. Then it has to be in subearth and all traces covered. The father-in-law's influence, no bringing back, too dangerous. The Eluluk glanced at the official. So, the head asked. He has certainly transgressed. He might even have the disease. Get rid of him, said the second official. The head turned to the catcher. What do you recommend, Orla? This was the usual form of address to a catcher by a high government representative or official. The catcher squeezed a smile from his thin lips. Kill. Justify, said the Eluluk. If he dies or if he lives makes no difference, because he works on the register, because of his family. Then if he has the disease, it is my duty to exterminate. If he has transgressed, he has no further role. If he is innocent, he will have lost authority. But the commander, referring to Adam's father-in-law, if traces are covered, he will not care, said the catcher. You hear the Orla's words, said the head. We must act, either way. I will make him speak, said the catcher. You have not to fear. His confession will expose any chains, expose anything rotten inside records. Then let it be so, said the Eluluk. We support. And my officials? Asked the head. They nodded. The catcher moved silently, exhausted by his words. He was in a short temper, having lost for the first time that year white bodying. Make him speak, said the head. He will speak, and then he will die. The catcher was mildly interested in Adam X, the register official. He was not Eluluk, he was not high government, but if he had transgressed, then he was a cancer at the body's heart. An interesting case, perhaps, and married to a commander's daughter. The evidence against him could go either way, but he, the catcher, would first take his words and then take his life, or rather, the wrath would. At his home, the catcher went to the sealed back room. It was here that he studied, bred and genetically engineered, modified the beasties. His love for the brown, crawly things had developed from an early boyhood passion. Whereas others hunted for spiders and diligently killed them, the catcher had broken the laws and captured them. In those days, there was still some to be found in the upper northeastern valleys. All spiders were suspect, of course, but of the millions that had been poisoned or killed in a multitude of ways, only a handful carried the disease. The catcher needed only 2 to breed. Eventually, even the breeding scheme was made redundant. The catcher loved his stubby-legged, plump-bodied creatures, loved the webs they made, though the web for them was anachronistic, a work of art. The web was to the spider what a piece of art or sculpture was to a human in the upper world. To begin, he had bred the spiders, handling them with heavy gloves and keeping them in lead-sealed glass cases. Later he gained their trust. Instinctively, perhaps more, they did not bite him. The spiders carried the disease as a result of a terrible accident. Genetic experiments had produced an unlucky crossover into the insect world, contaminating the common housefly. The fly reproduced and mutated the disease quickly, but it was the spiders that ate them that developed a reaction and a liquid which hosted the disease. Nobody for sure knew whether the disease was a mixture of a natural and dormant substance or purely a synthetic disease or a combination of the two. The flies had laid eggs in a butchered calf which had been genetically altered and which, unknown to the original scientists, had been infected by TLP, a disease traceable to NLD. The spiders, Rapithra thuthri, turned aggressive and began biting people, and then the terrible disease passed to humans. Chains developed and grew, link by link. The catcher became fascinated by spiders in general and by the wraths in particular. But all spiders were hunted and killed by all manner of means, and much later, in subearth, those forefathers of the modern disease-free helpers developed the sniff, and with the sniff they tracked and killed the spiders who survived in grim hiding places. Wasps and rats were bred to help exterminate the spiders, the practice of keeping a wasp in the home being a subearth tradition that survived. But in subearth the species survived, in upper the fear survived, and there were those who maintained the myth that diseased spiders still existed. The catcher had found his wraths in the valleys, but it was his later cloning of these and their non-organic adaptation that led to them becoming beasties, not crawlies. It was from the catcher that the development of semi-robotic insects was used for military purposes, though never officially. It was the catcher who created the hunter wraths. He had done all that from a boyhood passion, and since he'd begun there were now 20 catchers operating for the government, and though their status was semi-mystical, the catcher knew well enough their record. They did not fail. They hunted with their beasties and brought in their prey. Those uppers who escaped below were reduced to the living dead, captured and brought back to be experimented on or killed. Any subs were automatically exterminated. The catchers were rightly feared. The spiders the catcher produced were formidable creatures. They had highly developed hunting skills, a tenacity that could see them cover scores of lengths to kill their prey. They had resilience to all predators, and because of their robotic components could survive most natural adversities, though submersion in water was sometimes a problem. Even when the organic spider died, the robotic could survive. The catcher did not control his beings in any truly mechanical sense, but rather had developed a relationship. He was able to train other catchers in developing this relationship. It was linked in some way to the ancient art of horse whispering, a skill now as dead as the horses of old, the only horses remaining being those flogged near half to death in subearth. Spider communication was based on holding a pre-modified beast in the palm of the hand, known as a crawly. Many humans had died in training, and creating a subtle interaction through movements of the hand muscles and the spider's reaction to the palm sweat. Breath is also blown over the wrath. Nothing concrete is known about how the feeling is achieved. Only the catcher has exact knowledge. One day he promised he would pass the knowledge on. The catcher loved his beasts, loved them in a way he could not his fellow men and women. He had mild distaste for uppers and contempt for subs. Of the subs with the disease he had no emotion whatsoever. Only when he witnessed the white bodying did he display a flicker of concern. But this was not for the fate of the stoners, only the credits he had heaped on either. The catcher exhausted the computer files on Adam X, paid a visit to the man's home, spied on his pregnant wife. When he was ready, he chose the beastie. When the crawling body was dropped into his pocket, he took a vehicle from the compound and headed for subearth. No questions, no further inquiry. Adam X had been missing for 2 days, and his guilt shone. As the engine hissed through the upper world, the catcher reminded himself of the sport, whitebodying, he so enjoyed. He also cursed himself for losing, wondered why he had chosen the snake over the turtle on his last visit, wondered too how men, like the man upon whom he was preying, could have led the lives of government officials. Thinking about Adam, he wondered exactly what the particular nature of his descent was. Thought how each link of this man's fallen life would have to be reanimated to trace those connected. The spy in the register affairs would also eventually be hunted. The wife of Adam would be persecuted. The commander would fall from historical grace, be written out of history as was the norm. From these traces they would find others, and these others would lead to yet more others, for it was imperative to keep the upper world pure in mind and deed, which meant hunting down the unclean ones. At the border, the zealous guards stopped him. Identification? The catcher smiled. Identification, the middle-aged one snapped. The catcher flicked open his digital. Their look, oh, how it amused him. Carry on through, the unshaven face grovelled. Yes, he would. Oh, yes, he would. And did they know what he carried in his pocket? A beautiful creature that could bite them dead in an instant, or bite them into a near eternity. Whatever, in fact, he, the catcher, chose. On into subearth he hissed. With his right hand he tickled the beastie, began to communicate with it. and this was a thrill the catcher never tired of, began to lock into the memory of a species that was so different from the human, a creature that had a perfect and yet terrible beauty, a creature that had bolted onto its living insect limbs the most superb technology of the uppers. The catcher sang to his beastie in his jacket pocket, sang with the twitch of muscle and skin, sang with the moistening of his palms, sang with the leaking DNA and the melding of two life forms, an inaudible throbbing of microscopic science. One day science would end their dependence upon the subs. One day there would be no need of the organic. One day there would be no shadowy movement from the long huts of subearth to the cloying politeness of the corridors of power of the Eluluk. The wind of the day before had settled down. The catcher smiled. There were 20 others of his kind hunting the sea. They never tired. They were always needed. It was the way of things. The likes of Adam X were bad apples dropping from the tree of life, and the tree stood in upper paradise. For the world of the uppers was paradise, so long, of course, as you did not transgress the laws.